palaces, the most spectacular and lavish homes on Earth. Luxuriously designed for the royals who wanted the biggest and the best. Behind the golden gates of these royal megastructures are incredible stories waiting to be discovered. Infamous monarchs from history, and the artists, designers, and engineers who turned their grand visions into a reality. These are the most opulent, flamboyant, and innovative royal residences around the world. In this episode, Edinburgh Castle, a symbol of Scottish might that's been bitterly fought over for more than 1,000 years. Some of the most famous names in British history, from Mary Queen of Scots to Oliver Cromwell, have walked its battlements. The castle contains feats of engineering that have made it one of the most impressive fortresses in the world. Edinburgh, UK, home to this spectacular castle that has been besieged over 20 times. It dominates not just the city, but Scotland itself. It has been a royal palace, a prison, and a military fortress. The ancient stones of Edinburgh Castle tell a remarkable story of intrigue, conquest, and royal rivalry. Archaeologist Peter Yeoman spent 30 years of his illustrious career unearthing the secrets of Edinburgh Castle.
Surprisingly, we knew very little about the archaeology of the castle. There was an early documentary date from the 600s referring to the castle as Dunedin. Before that, we knew absolutely nothing. There was no evidence whatsoever. Well, I was able to find remains of prehistoric houses and incredible depth of archaeology across parts of the site. And those prehistoric houses, the earliest of those dated back to the Bronze Age in 900 BC. So you can put on my gravestone, he doubled the age of Edinburgh Castle.
Edinburgh Castle has changed so much throughout the millennia that at least 2 previous incarnations of the structure have come and gone. Parts of the current castle have stood since the 12th century, a medieval fortress built to protect the Scottish crown. But by the early 16th century, a palace inspired by the great courts of Europe was added by King James IV.
So the palace that was being developed in Edinburgh Castle by James IV in the late 15th and early 16th century was very much being developed on a model which would be recognised by leading Europeans from anywhere else in Europe. There was a certain pattern to it.
On the 4 sides of a large courtyard, now known as Crown Square, James IV built a palace which became the residential quarters of the king, a large chapel, servants' quarters, and finally a great hall, which was completed in 1511.
So a great hall like this one's very different from the military purposes of a castle. This would be the ceremonial sort of heart of a royal residence. Just as people were defined by what they wore in this period. You could show your nobility, you could show your status. In a building, the sort of grandeur and the stature of a room like this would show the purposes. So it could be used for feasting, it could be used for entertaining foreign dignitaries, it could be used for celebrating baptisms or weddings. This is a real Renaissance statement of royal power, hospitality, majesty, politics, everything that you need in a royal court.
King James IV was married to English King Henry VIII's sister, Margaret. And in commissioning the Great Hall, he may well have been competing with his brother-in-law's version at Hampton Court Palace. Both monarchs were looking to the past to assert their authority.
Henry VIII builds a great hall about the same time, and it looks like a medieval great hall because you're harking back. You're looking to the future, you're projecting your image as a mighty king, but you're looking back at your ancestry as well, because that's the basis of your power. And all these buildings arrayed around Crown Square, evolving at a time in the 1400s and the 1500s, some of which we still have spectacularly today, are a result of that.
The structure holding up the roof of the Great Hall is a classic early 16th century example of art combined with engineering.
They wanted to have an uninterrupted, open, beautiful space for this hall, and so they had to think carefully about how they were going to actually achieve this long span with the roof without putting obstructions into this space. So if you just put a single piece of timber across that width of that hall, it would have been really bulky, it probably would have been sagging a bit, and it wouldn't have been aesthetically a very interesting thing to look at. So to use less material, to make it more structurally efficient, and also to make it look great, they used this kind of exciting medieval technique, the hammer beam truss.
Hammer beam roofs were used in medieval England, but they were very rare in Scotland. This was one of only two. These were dramatic timber structures designed to bridge over very large spaces.
So what you can do is you start off from the walls and you create these triangular brackets, and that's the kind of the first piece of structure you have. Then on that reduced span, you can start to put arches in and trusses in and put a much more delicate kind of arrangement of beams and columns to create what you see there today.
A hall like this was a dramatic space that was the centerpiece of the dining hall, really, of the castle. So it was a space that you could show off. It was a deliberately opulent space, just by its mere scale.
The story of Edinburgh Castle begins long before the construction of the Great Hall and the Stuart kings and queens of the 16th century. Many historic castles are built on mounds painstakingly made by hand. But Edinburgh Castle is built on a structure provided by nature itself. It stands on the solid heart of an ancient volcano, 350 million years old.
So it's made up of basalt rock, and basalt rock is a type of igneous rock. Igneous rock is basically what you get when molten material cools down. So it's actually a crystalline structure, and it's quite strong.
From prehistory, this formidable hill, known as Castle Rock, has provided refuge and security.
Its natural geography is such a great defensive feature. But it's also, for status, it's so highly visible in the landscape. It can be seen for miles around, and you can see for miles around. And I think that's always been an important factor in the use of this site.
One of the first monarchs to build a fortress on Castle Rock was the 11th century king, Malcolm III, who's been called the founding father of modern Scotland. Nothing survives of Malcolm's castle, but historians believe they know what it would have looked like.
The principal buildings would have been on the highest part of the rock, and it would have been enclosed within a largely timber palisade, possibly with a stone base. And inside that, you would have had buildings that were probably primarily timber. There's a tendency for us to think of timber as cheap and impermanent, but actually it's a sign that you've got access to a very, very scarce resource, and the ability to build large structures in timber is a sign of your access to that type of wealth.
During Malcolm's reign, in October 1066, one of the most iconic events in British history occurred: William the Conqueror's victory at the Battle of Hastings. The new Norman King of England brought with him revolutionary building techniques and designs for fortifications and castles. Malcolm's youngest son David I of Scotland, had spent time in the English court, and when he became king in 1124, he copied the Normans' construction techniques.
He was a great builder of churches and abbeys. And he was a very good king. A very stable reign. He'd grown up partly in England, as they did. He had English lands. So he knew how a modern Norman-style medieval kingdom worked.
At the very top of Castle Rock, King David built a fort in the Norman style, replacing an old timber structure with stone. For centuries, it was thought that every part of it had been destroyed. Then, in the 1840s, it was realized that a room being used as an ammunition store had been built for a more peaceful purpose, a chapel. Dating from around 1130. Built in a Romanesque style, it is dedicated to King David's mother, Margaret, who died in the castle in 1093 and was declared a saint in 1250.
The chapel is part of the essential apparatus, the things that you need in a high-status residence of the 12th century. David, remember, he's brought up largely at the court of the Norman kings of England. And so he's seen how their houses are organised. And one of the key elements in that is a chapel. Because the chapel clerks, the chaplains in the chapel, they're your secretaries. They're the people who are doing your writing. And David is introducing record keeping and the regular production of parchment as evidence for the king's business.
St. Margaret's Chapel was not only a status symbol, it became a sacred place. Her bones and her clothing were believed to have healing powers.
We have evidence from inventories and historic records relating to Edinburgh Castle that suggest that some of the relics of St. Margaret were kept and used here. And indeed, St. Margaret's relics became associated with childbirth and with healing, and that her relics could often be used during royal births and pregnancies.
By the late 13th century, Scotland and its main stronghold, Edinburgh Castle, were under the rule of the English king, Edward I. But the Scots rebelled in what became known as the Wars of Independence.
Edinburgh Castle emerges regularly as one of the key, much fought over fortresses by both sides. It falls into the hands of Edward I of England in 1296, basically with a whimper. When he gets to Edinburgh, he's more or less met by a janitor with a key saying, there's the castle, take it. And it's occupied then, from that point, continuously by an English garrison until 1313.
For one man, Scottish King Robert I, popularly known as Robert the Bruce, the English occupation of Edinburgh Castle was a national humiliation. By 1314, Robert had recaptured most of the castles in Scotland, and Edinburgh was next. It seemed impregnable until an offer of help arrived from the inside.
So there's an English garrison, in some cases about 350 strong, near enough. And one of the garrison members was a man called William Francis. So he seems to be a Scot, but he is in the pay of the English. He is working with the garrison. He's got a girlfriend down below the castle in the town. The governor of the castle isn't allowing him to get out regularly to see his girlfriend, and this leads to friction between them, to put it mildly.
Eager for revenge, Francis covertly made contact with the nephew of Robert the Bruce, Thomas Randolph.
And he says to Thomas Randolph, I can show you a secret route into the castle. This is the route that he used to come out for his secret meetings with his girlfriend down in the town. And so Randolph, with Francis, takes a small group of men up this passage, is the way it's described, a secret route up the rock, out at the west end of the site. a direction from which the garrison doesn't expect to be attacked.
And there's a fantastic account of the dangers and tribulations of these 30 men climbing up and trying to keep quiet, and them hearing the voices of the English lookouts talking on the battlement, saying, was that somebody making a noise coming up the rock or not? There's always that risk that they're going to be discovered.
And so they're able to surprise the guards that control the gate, throw open the gates, let a larger group of Scots in, and they take the castle.
And it's a tremendous achievement, turning point. It was one of the great things that gave the Scots confidence that they could actually take the English on and beat them.
In 1314, now in command of Edinburgh Castle, King Robert the Bruce did something unexpected. He destroyed it. But there was method to his madness.
Now, he had tried, when he first seizes the throne of Scotland in 1306, he had tried to fight war the traditional way, which was you capture castles, you garrison them, you hold them yourself, and you use them to control the countryside round about them. It ties up his ability to move rapidly around the country and deal with problems. It drains his resources. He doesn't want to be tied down with garrisoning fortresses, but he knows that he can't just leave them standing empty. So what you do, you recapture the building and then you render it useless to an invader. And everyone he takes, he destroys. And we can say quite clearly that it's a comprehensive destruction.
You know, it must have been an incredible sight. There was lots of wood in them, and it looks like on the side of St Margaret's Chapel, evidence of burning from that period. It would have made a great fire which would be seen from miles around.
The castle of King David was razed to the ground. The only building left standing amongst the rubble was St Margaret's Chapel.
And for a time in the early 14th century, the castle rock was deserted. There were sheep grazing here, animals grazing here.
Although Robert the Bruce had reduced the castle to rubble, his son and successor, King David II, recognized the importance of the fortress and its location. In the mid-14th century, an army of builders began to restore Edinburgh Castle to its former glory. Construction techniques in the medieval period were very different from modern methods. There was no blueprint for the workmen to follow.
There was not what we would call an architect. Things were worked out on site and changed according to need. And when something was built, it could be tested. If it didn't work, it could be taken down and built again. So there was much more trial and error, and there was much more adjustment as the work progressed. The stonemason would first construct the foundations, but foundations on medieval buildings were never very deep. And of course, if you're building on solid rock, you don't need to dig down foundations. You just make grooves in the rock, fit the stone blocks into them. And then it was just sheer manpower.
Medieval castles had solid walls, with 2 layers of stone on the outside, filled with cement and rubble on the inside. The outside stones were chiseled smooth to make them difficult for an attacker to climb. It's estimated that up to 3,000 men worked on the construction of the medieval castle. Although their work has been admired for hundreds of years, they remain largely unknown.
Occasionally in the royal financial records you can pick up references to people like, Peter the Mason, John the Carpenter. But for most of the time, we really are completely ignorant as to who the people who designed all the fine work of the castle was.
When the medieval Edinburgh Castle was finished, it would have inspired both fear and awe.
It's very interesting, the Hollywood presentation of what these castles looked like. Sometimes is probably closer to the reality than we might think. And although we see these buildings largely now just outside as bare sandstone, they originally would have been lime washed. And here in Scotland, they use what's called King's Gold, a pale, creamy yellow lime wash. And in daylight, in sunlight, it glows. it almost becomes luminous. And so the building would have been like a beacon standing out. So you're making a statement that everybody would understand. That, look at me, I am the king, I am the most powerful person around, this is the symbol of my authority.
One of the first drawings of Edinburgh was made by an English spy in the 16th century. It shows the result of David's ambition, a castle with towers, and dominating the east side, facing the city, a huge structure named after the king himself, David's Tower.
So it's the royal private apartments and reception rooms stacked one on top of another. It rises some 5 stories in height above cellars on the highest part of the rock. So it would have been visible for miles around. And this is the beginning of the transformation of Edinburgh into this principal fortress of the realm, the key castle in royal hands. It begins with David II.
Although David's Tower was destroyed by an English artillery bombardment in the 16th century, evidence of it still remains under one of the castle's most famous attractions, the Half Moon Battery.
This is what almost 2 million visitors a year see. As they approach the castle, they see from the esplanade this great curving frontal wall, and we're standing on the lid of that. But one of my predecessors, a man called W.T. Oldreeve, in 1912, he worked out that there's probably bits of the tower surviving underneath here.
David's Tower was built not just to house the king's reception rooms and private apartments. It was a key part of the castle's defences, and it had some surprises for the enemy.
So this speaks of the brutality of medieval warfare. I'm just coming from what would have been the outside of David's Tower in the medieval period behind me. But if somebody had attacked the castle and broken through, they'd break in this way, they'd get their battering rams, they'd come smashing through a door here, and then all of a sudden, because what's in front of us here is now covered with this, I hope, safe metal grille, is an enormous great pit, maybe with pointy sticks in the bottom of it, and anybody breaking in through the door wouldn't know that this dirty great big hole was here.
At the very bottom of David's Tower is evidence of the ancient foundations of the castle and the skill of the medieval builders.
What speaks volumes about the enormous challenge that for 3,000 years there has been on building on top of this mighty rock, which is that you've got the basalt, this immensely hard, cooled lava from the final eruptions of the volcano that was here 350 million years ago. In fact, this volcano went up 1 kilometre above our heads. That's how enormous it was, and it's been ground away over the millions of years. And so what the medieval builders have done is really quite extraordinary, because when you think about the poor tools that they had, soft iron tools and so on, they have chipped away the platform that I'm standing on to then get a vertical face, and then started to build. And there's just the first few courses that we can see of the medieval palace there, with the great vault of the Half Moon Battery above us.
When King David II died at Edinburgh Castle in 1371, a new Scottish royal dynasty began, the House of Stuart. Over the next 200 years, they would leave a lasting effect on the history of the British Isles and the castle itself. In the late 1400s, Stuart King James IV extended the fortress by building out over the perilous south side.
The Castle Rock itself would have always been a very difficult site to occupy. You've got issues in terms of the height. There are sheer drops on most sides of Castle Rock. There would have been engineering issues from day one, and the vaults that hang out over the top of Castle Rock now, which the Royal Palace and the Great Hall stand on, There would have been a huge feat of engineering in the late 15th and early 16th century to construct those vaults. And I think it's really impressive that those walls, those structures still survive today.
Edinburgh Castle is built, like many castles on a rocky promontory, to make it difficult to attack. But of course that means that you're working on the walls at great height, even before you've built any wall. And working at great height is always difficult. There are high winds, and you can fall off the scaffolding, and you can get seriously hurt. And it was very difficult to build scaffolding off the side of a cliff. So all of these things made it much more difficult to construct than a normal building on flat ground.
By the middle of the 16th century, the Stuart royal family had ruled over Scotland for almost 200 years, with Edinburgh Castle as their bastion of power. The dynasty was secured when a new heir was born to King James V in 1542, just days before he died.
Mary Stuart becomes Queen of Scots when she's 6 days old in December of 1542, and she immediately becomes a bone of contention between the various powers looking at Scotland, realizing that a country which is ruled over by a baby girl is ripe to be snapped up. Even though she's still in nappies, people are competing to who's going to get to marry her. Which royal family is she going to get married into, which is a proxy way of saying, which country is going to get to absorb Scotland. And the two possibilities are England and France, the traditional enemy, England, or Scotland's traditional ally in France. Henry VIII is very keen that she should marry his own son, the future Edward VI. There's only 5 years in age between them. It looks like a plausible marriage. There are some in Scotland who support it. But Queen Mary is taken to France herself before her 6th birthday, is pledged in marriage to the French Dauphin, to the Crown Prince, and actually marries him.
15-year-old Mary was married to the future king, Francis II of France, in 1558. But just 2 years later, a wave of feeling in Scotland led the country to abandon its Catholic roots and change its allegiance to Protestant Christianity.
So by the summer of 1560, Scotland has moved decisively from being within France's orbit to being in England's, even though their queen, Mary, is still in France and still married to the French king. But then the French king himself dies. And so she, as an 18-year-old widow, returns to Scotland, to a country that she could scarcely remember. But Mary isn't just the Queen of Scots. She's also, by some arguments, the rightful Queen of England. She certainly has a very good claim to the English throne. She's directly descended from Henry VII. And if you argue, and there's a very good legal case for arguing this, that Queen Elizabeth I is illegitimate, that she should have no right to inherit the throne, then by strict order of primogeniture, Mary ought to be the Queen of England as well.
In 1565, Mary was wed for a second time to her half-cousin, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. And in June 1566, a royal procession made its way through Edinburgh and up into the castle. Mary was heavily pregnant and had been persuaded by her advisors that the castle was the best place for the birth.
From a security point of view, the castle on the rock is the safe place to be. So if there's any threat or disturbance, and bear in mind that in the 1560s, Scotland is going through a major period of internal turbulence. There's the Reformation, the change in religion is taking place. You have got supporters of Catholicism versus supporters of Protestantism. Various factions who are competing for power. It's a time of relative insecurity, and you just need to be sure if the Queen is about to give birth to a child that she is in the safest place for that birth to take place.
Over the border in England, Mary's cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, watched events in Edinburgh with concern. On the 19th of June, 1566, Mary gave birth to a boy and named him James.
The ambassador wrote very quickly to tell Elizabeth of the news that the Queen of Scotland had given birth to an heir, and to a male heir at that. And Elizabeth, you do see some of her vulnerability, because she says, I'm of barren stock. And I think she knew then that she was never going to get married and she was never going to have children.
Mary, Queen of Scots, is the most obvious candidate to succeed her. That prospect fills many of Elizabeth's subjects with horror, because Mary, Queen of Scots isn't just a Scotswoman, she's also a Catholic. And it's that threat, more than anything else, that ultimately leads Mary, Queen of Scots to lose her head.
Mary, Queen of Scots, was imprisoned and finally executed in February 1587. Her English counterpart, Elizabeth I, had reluctantly signed the death warrant.
We were always fascinated by two queens, one island, and it seeing that only one could survive. And yes, Elizabeth was the one who survived and died peacefully in her own bed, but she left the throne without an heir, and the heir became Mary's, so perhaps, in a sense, Mary won in the end.
In 1603, 16 years after the death of Mary, the son she gave birth to at Edinburgh Castle, James VI of Scotland, became King James I of England. The two nations were now ruled by the same monarch. But if the people of Edinburgh thought James's birthplace would become the centre of his kingdom, they were sadly mistaken.
So when James succeeded to the English throne in 1603, there was always expectation that he'd managed to sort of keep two courts going, that he'd come back salmon-like from whence he was spawned maybe every year. I think probably once he went to England, he realised the pressure of royal business was enormous. He didn't come back so much.
And when James did come to Edinburgh, he preferred to stay in nearby Holyrood Palace, a more comfortable, less windswept royal residence. Yet Edinburgh Castle remained important to him as a symbol of the Stuarts' royal lineage. In 1615, James ordered that major repairs and improvements to the castle should be completed in time to mark the 50th anniversary of his proclamation as King of Scotland 2 years later.
In the years running up to the celebrations for his homecoming and his Golden Jubilee, he invested a great deal in the Royal Palace block. Much of the exterior details that we see on the Royal Palace at the castle today are as a result of the work of James VI. You can see in there today the heraldic symbols.
Oak from Essex and stone from local quarries were brought up to the castle. Plasterers transformed the ceilings in the royal apartments. Walls were rebuilt and weatherproofed using a technique known as harling. The men who worked on the more dangerous parts of the castle were rewarded with extra money.
There was a lot of excitement about harling the walls and putting glass in some of the windows and improving the decoration, partly to celebrate rooms like this, the Great Hall, where there was going to be banquets. But there is evidence he not only came back here, but he also came back here on his 51st birthday in June 1617 and apparently feasted in here from 4 o'clock until 9 o'clock in the evening.
The castle's mighty 15th century gun, known as Mons Meg, one of the largest artillery pieces in Europe, was fired in honour of the Stuart king. James was back home, where he was born. The importance of the castle was not lost on him or any British monarch to come.
Edinburgh Castle is a fortress, but it also is a palace, because kings and queens live there. It was so vital. It was fought over, and it was fought over in a much more symbolic way than Holyrood Palace was. When it came to taking Edinburgh, you had to take the castle. And when you took Edinburgh Castle, you'd taken Edinburgh, and by association, you'd taken all of Scotland. So although the king wasn't perpetually there, it really was seen by everyone as the king's seat. If you got it, you deposed the king.
The arrival of an infamous Englishman brought about one of the greatest changes to Edinburgh Castle. In December 1650, Oliver Cromwell, the newly appointed Captain General of the Commonwealth, invaded Scotland and seized the castle. For the man who led the forces that defeated and then executed the Stuart King, Charles I, James's son, it was a symbolic moment. Cromwell turned the royal fortress into a military garrison. Even the finest building in the castle was transformed.
He rides his horse into what was the Great Hall, and from then on, there are floors inserted in there, and it becomes a barracks for about 300 men. And the buildings all around Crown Square lose their royal function. They go over to become functional military buildings, military storehouses, barracks, canteens, that sort of thing. So we see this great shift in the middle of the 1600s and the period of the Civil War, the need for a standing army. And therefore, at places like this, the need for accommodation and everything that was involved in looking after the troops. And that's the character of Edinburgh Castle from then on for the next 200 plus years, is as a military garrison, first and foremost.
After the restoration of the English monarchy in 1660, Edinburgh Castle remained a valued military prize. In the 18th century, it became an obsession for a movement known as the Jacobites, supporters of Catholic James II of England and later Bonnie Prince Charlie.
It's so symbolic of the Jacobites who want to seize the throne back, who feel that they have the truthful, the real monarch throughout the 18th century. And if they get Edinburgh Castle, they think they'll have got the throne. It's not Holyrood Palace, it's not anywhere else in Scotland, it's Edinburgh Castle they want. And once they've got that, from there they feel they can cement their claim to the throne and govern the whole of Scotland and hopefully get their hands on England.
The Jacobite threat means that actually Scotland is regarded, some places of it, almost like a war zone in the early 18th century.
The Jacobites laid siege to the castle in 1689, but failed to capture it. However, they weren't finished. In 1715, they returned, only for their attack to end in farce.
They almost get it, but the ladder they're using is actually a bit too short, and then then it all fails and they're hanged and flogged, because Edinburgh Castle is so symbolic.
A further unsuccessful Jacobite attack in 1745 proved to be the final siege in the castle's history. As a result of the Jacobite scare, a number of engineers were employed to modernize and repair the castle. New storehouses and barracks were built, as well as more visible battlements, creating the castle we recognize today.
Partly the defences needed to be improved to meet the advances in military technology at the time, but the castle had also suffered very intensive siege in 1689, and so there were a number of repairs that were needed. The defences were 50 to 100 years old in many parts of the site, if not older. They really transformed the defences of Edinburgh Castle, building the Argyll battery, the western defences that cover the lower western side of the site, and they improved parts of the Half Moon battery, the gun bastion there.
As the castle evolved, nothing of the old was wasted.
Any stone in the castle has probably been in 5 or 6 buildings in its life, going back into prehistory. And once the stone was here, and you maybe had buildings that you didn't need anymore, or buildings that had been destroyed by cannon fire, You simply reuse the stone, and there's loads of evidence. So any of these stones have got amazing stories to tell, tremendous time depth.
As well as keeping people out, Edinburgh Castle was built as a place to keep people in. The largest number of prisoners held on Castle Rock was during the Napoleonic Wars of the early 19th century, in which French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte and his allies attempted to conquer Europe. Up to 1,000 French, Spanish and Dutch prisoners were held here. Attempts to escape were understandable given the conditions they were held in.
The vaults themselves would have been really quite dark and cramped spaces, with the soldiers sleeping on hammocks hung up in lines throughout the vaults. During the Napoleonic Wars, they were really pushed to breaking point. They had such a huge number of prisoners coming into the castle and that were held within the vaults. It would have been really cramped and confined conditions. And it actually inspired escape. We get the impression that there must have been so many soldiers here that perhaps it was quite difficult to keep track of the individuals.
We have evidence of important prisoners undertaking daring escapes from the castle, knotting their bed sheets together and climbing over the rock, hiding in heaps of dung, all sorts of glamorous stories in their attempts to escape. And some did. Some escaped by dressing up and managing to fool the guards, or by sheer bribery.
And unfortunately, in Edinburgh Castle, many parts of the castle were built of sandstone that was rather soft. So that later, when it was converted into a prison, the prisoners could actually dig their way out, at which point it was realised that sandstone was perhaps not the best material.
Around 1780, during the middle of the American War of Independence, a prisoner from the then colony carved a distinctive flag.
There's some fascinating graffiti on one of the doors that survives, including depictions of ships that these men would have been sailing on, and really famously one of the earliest depictions of the Stars and Stripes banner, what's now the American flag.
Any Americans in Edinburgh Castle today are likely to be tourists. The fortress is now one of the most popular attractions in Scotland, drawing over 1 million visitors a year from all over the world. They are fascinated by its hundreds of years of royal history and its military traditions that continue today.
And at 1 o'clock every day, apart from Sundays, Good Friday and Christmas Day, the 1 o'clock guns fired from here at Edinburgh Castle. It dates back to 1861, where at the request of ship's captains, they requested an audio signal to be fired so they could mark the kilometres for obviously navigation throughout the world.
Over thousands of years, builders and engineers have turned an extinct volcano into a living fortress so valuable it's been fought over more than any other castle or palace in Britain. Its walls have witnessed key moments in the story of the Scottish people.
Scotland doesn't have a Shakespeare, but one feels that if there was a Shakespeare who was writing history plays, in every single play there'd have to be a scene in Edinburgh Castle almost. It's seen murders, endless sieges, warfare, royalty.
It is intimidating, it is unconquerable, it is saying, you will not invade Edinburgh, you will not take our city. It is a big statement of strength and power, one that very few people would want to take on.
If you want an understanding of the great history of Scotland, and Scotland does have the most extraordinary history, you can come to one place, you can come here, and you can be in the place where so many of these great events happened, which were pivotal to the whole of Scotland's story.